Knock knock. Who's there? Spell. Spell who? WHO. While vacationing, a girl and her parents are taken hostage by armed strangers who demand that the family make a choice to avert the apocalypse. So Knock at the Cabin is the new thriller from M. Night Shyamalan. It's based on the book by Paul Tremblay. Now, I've not read that yet, but I really want to. My wife and my oldest son have read the book, and so I'm going to get into a tiny bit of how much may or may not be similar to the movie in just a little bit. But this isn't a review of that book, just of the movie. And then, while I'm going to be avoiding spoilers, I'm also going to get into a few at the very end with plenty of warning beforehand, so you can watch the majority of this and not worry about any spoilers. The teaser trailer for this set up the story really well, so when I discuss anything with specifics, I'm only going to stick to what was shown in the teaser, as it doesn't give anything away. Now, this is a really stacked cast that all delivers some spellbinding and captivating performances. I mean, first we've got Dave Bautista. He's menacing, but in a very quiet and patient manner. He's polite, well-spoken, and comes across as an everyman. That is, really, until he tells the family inside the cabin why he and his three friends are standing on their doorstep. Now, there were a couple of times that Bautista's raspy line delivery, it made it a little difficult to discern exactly what he was saying. So if you've got any sort of hearing loss, you may find you miss tiny pieces here and there. Now, I loved his presence within the story. From a physical standpoint, I mean, he towers over people, and his girth alone, I mean, is frightening. But then it contrasts drastically with how he speaks to people. He's so calm that it becomes unnerving. And he also is super convincing in his delivery. I mean, I really felt like he believes what he's saying, which is hugely important for this story in particular. Now, Rupert Grint is teaming up with Shyamalan once again, having worked successfully together on Apple's Servant series. Now, while we don't know much about his character and don't get a ton of development on him, there's a moment when the camera locks in on his face and then pushes in slowly. It is an incredibly intimate shot, and it ends up being extremely powerful within the scene. Nikki Amuka-Bird, who I'm a fan of since seeing her in the BBC's Luther, she's cast off her British accent and gives us a character who is wonderfully distressed. The look that's captured in her eyes conveys trust, sympathy, fear, and then this weird mix of resolve and doubt. I mean, she's a soft spot within the storytelling that's really needed to create some emotional unease. The last of the people that accompany Bautista is played by Abby Quinn, and while I'm not familiar with her work, she has a great presence in here that mixes believability with uncertainty. She's charismatic, but also a bit flighty, and that then makes her easier to connect with. I mean, she feels real, like she's caught up in what's going on and believes it all, but she also doesn't want to. And then there's the family. We got Jonathan Groff, Ben Aldridge, and Kristen Cui. Now, their dynamic is powerful, and it is filled with palpable dread and then touching emotion. They play the grounded area of the story. I mean, they speak so many questions and logical thoughts that were passing through my mind as the story went along. Now, as a couple, Groff and Aldridge, they're endearing, and while I was drawn to their story, there are a couple of elements that are hinted at, but could have been more powerful and even integral to the story had they been examined more. Now, both faith and family are themes that the story touches on, and in both of these instances, there was more to be told and shown with the couple that would have made their arc even more impactful, even though it was still moving as it was. Something that really stood out to me with this film is the cinematography and the visual portions of the storytelling. There are many one-shot, long, continuous takes that work to envelop us in a scene. There's a bit that takes place outside the cabin in the woods, and the camera follows along with a character, with the movements putting us right into the position with the character. I mean, we're even peering around a corner as the character does so, and then pulling back when they do, so we as the audience get a very narrow field of vision. And this then amps up the suspense. There are other times when the shot will be composed so that we see a character on the far left or the far right of the screen looking at them, but from behind another character. I mean, it's as if we're peering over the shoulder at the characters. I mean, the shots will then alternate left and right as the dialogue's delivered. I mean, it's not only creative, but it looks amazing. And I mentioned already how the camera locked in on Rupert Grint's face to capture some deep emotions, and this is done many times throughout the story, choosing a character who's experiencing something intense and then getting into their personal space so that their emotional state is unmistakable within that moment. I also mentioned how while I haven't read Paul Tremblay's Cabin at the End of the World, my wife and oldest son have. Now, my wife attended the screening with me, and she let me know that the beginning of the film sticks fairly close to the novel. I I mean, obviously not exactly like it, but close enough. And then at about halfway, the movie really detours sharply away from the novel and then takes its own path all the way to the end. So if you've read the book, does this make you more or less excited to see the movie? I mean, I'm certainly intrigued now to read the source and then see how it differs. So I love the suspense and tension that's built as the characters are told to make choices or else massive consequences are going to ensue. There's doubt that's infused and inherent to the story, which I think is awesome because it sets up so many things to be questioned, including all of the characters. But then we get to the end of the movie, and for me, that's when it becomes lackluster. I mean, I wish I could dive into some specifics on what makes this not great for me, but literally anything I talk about within the end is a spoiler. So just note that if you are a fan of Shyamalan, but also know that he sometimes doesn't stick the landings, for this one, I think he misses, even though so much leading up to the conclusion is engaging, tense, even nail-biting at times. So overall, Knock at the Cabin starts off with an enigmatic and intriguing premise, filled with performances that are riveting and restrained. The doubts and questions that arise are effective to move the narrative forward, but ultimately end with a safe and flat resolution. This isn't Shyamalan's worst work, but it's also not his strongest or best. The acting is the reason to see this, but I'm not sure it will be anything memorable after the credits roll. There's no sex or nudity, some profanity, and some brutal violence. I give Knock at the Cabin 3 out of 5 couches. So what do you think is Shyamalan's best movie? Let me know in the comments below. And if you do go and see this, I hope you have an awesome time. Okay, so now I want to dive into some quick spoilers. So if you don't want to see or hear about them, definitely click away from this right now. Sound good? Okay, this is your spoiler warning. I mean, just to be clear, I'm going to say things that give away plot points. All right, here we go. So the full trailer, it shows everything about the story. It shows us what the group says is going to happen, does happen. There's a giant tidal wave, and while a little of this as reality is negated by logic, we then are shown planes falling from the sky. So the reason this is lackluster for me is that the story is exactly what it says it is. There's no subversion of expectations or experience. Had there been more doubt that's instilled, or at least maintained for so much longer, then the surprise of Bautista and his merry band of nutjobs telling the truth would have been shocking and even unnerving. But as it stands, it's exactly what they say it is. And we learn about that halfway into the story. Maybe this isn't going to bother you. Maybe you'll enjoy the lack of twist as the twist. And I wasn't even looking for a twist. I just didn't want the story to be so straightforward and unsurprising as it was. Anyway, I hope you have a blast with the film if you decide to see it. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.